Like my guest, millions of Americans suffer traumatic brain injuries every year. They don't have any hope of recovery until now. Welcome to the Mimi Geerges Show. College professor Clark Elliott was sitting at a light when his car was rear-ended. His head slammed into the headrest, causing a concussion. For 8 years, he lived with some pretty severe symptoms. Sometimes he couldn't walk, couldn't name his 5 children, or buy groceries. Doctors told him nothing could be done, and just learn to live with it, which he tried to do, until he met 2 doctors who said, "We can fix this." And they did. Clark Elliott's book is called The Ghost in My Brain. Clark, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Mimi. I'm delighted to be here.
Let's talk about the accident. When your head went back and forth like that, how serious did you think it was?
It's nothing. It was a minor car crash. I did black out for maybe a second. I saw stars. Then I pulled my car over to the side. It's true that odd things started happening even from the moment of the impact. But I didn't realize that there was any real problem. I looked pretty much the same. The EMT said, "We want to take you to the hospital." And I refused. I thought, I have to go teach my class. So,
I got like, "I'm fine." But the EMT said, "Do you know your name?"
And it was tricky for a minute. It took me, I said, "Well," and then, after a time lag, I said, "Oh yeah, sure, Dr. Clark Elliott." But it was a little bit peculiar that I couldn't remember it.
So at what point did you realize, what, something's wrong here?
Mimi, I'm glad you bring this up because this is something that is so insidious about concussion. At what point did I really actually know there was a serious problem? I could give an answer and say 2 months and I would still be telling the truth. It's so odd. When something goes missing, and there were so many things missing, it's so far gone that you often don't realize it. And, so I drove to class, and I had no memory of actually driving to teach my 3-hour evening class at DePaul. And my DePaul students, they're a delightful, salt of the earth sort of crowd. So we were kind of joking about my loopiness in class. But when class was over, I couldn't get out of the chair. I couldn't get through the door. I couldn't figure out how to walk downstairs, and I had to have someone help me from the building. And in the parking lot, I couldn't find my car, even though it was a small parking lot. But the thing about concussion is you're just so busy trying to solve the problem that I just can't seem to find my car. You don't realize that there's a problem.
So you did end up going to the emergency room.
Well, I thought, I'm just kind of shaken up. These odd things happening where I'm stuck in a chair in my living room and I can't get up for 3 minutes. I thought my muscles must be sore. But 3 days after the crash, I remember I'm standing in my living room. I've got sweat pouring out of my forehead, and I'm so sick I can barely stand up. My body's shaking, but I was determined to find out what had been bugging me all day long. And after 15 minutes, I finally realized 6 hours earlier I'd put my shoes on the wrong feet. And it was at that point I thought, I think there's something more than just shaking up muscles. And I did go to the emergency room where I spent 7 hours.
And what did they do for you there?
In the end, the doctor said, well, the scans look pretty good. You should be okay. And I said, well, I'm not feeling okay. I mean, they're trying to ask me what my name is, and I can see the words, 12-point font times, new, Roman font here, and yet I can't speak the words. As soon as I try to speak the words, the images disappear. So even asking my name, I don't know how to answer that. So I was puzzled. I said, well, I'm feeling pretty strange. What do you mean I'm okay? He said, well, you have a severe concussion, but we don't really notice too much in the brain scans, a dark area over here. But outside of that, you should be okay.
And that was it? And go home and get some rest?
Well, to their credit, they did send me home with sheets of paper telling me the instructions to have someone wake me up. And they gave me a bottle of pills. But when I got home, I realized I can't read. And I'm living alone. So I found the papers a few months later in a drawer. I found the bottle of Vicodin a year later that I had never taken because I didn't know what to do with it when I got home.
You couldn't read anymore?
Yes, that's true.
Because?
By the time I would get through one sentence, I got to the second sentence. I couldn't make sense of the context. I couldn't figure what did that first sentence mean. I could read it, in those early months, I could read maybe a line or two at a time. Interestingly, I could write after fashion. The secret was, don't see the words. If I just know what I want to say and let it come through my fingers. So I started taking notes about my experience from the very first day of after the crash.
Which eventually became this book.
Ultimately, 1,200 pages of notes. And most of that time, I was being told, you know, I got MRI, CT scans, I saw the best neurologists, rehab institutes, balance therapy. But the physicians were very consistent. They were all consistent in what they told me, and that was, you may see improvement in the first month, the first year, maybe after 2 years, and after that, you will never get better. That no one ever recovers from this kind of permanent brain damage, and you should learn to live with your symptoms. So I don't know why I was taking notes. I mean, there was no happy ending to the story at that point, but I did faithfully record so many of these very bizarre experiences.
Well, let's talk about how you got through your day-to-day. You miraculously kept your job as a college professor, given serious brain damage.
Well, you know, at that time I had 10 people living on my salary. I was the one earning the money, and I had, soon to have 5 children dependent on me. Everyone's medical insurance. There really was no choice. You know, this is what we do as parents, right? Mm-hmm. And it wasn't easy. You know, I did have a lot of tricks I developed, and many of those I put in the book. And, you know, I have to wonder if those people going through this right now might find some of those tricks actually to be a little bit useful. But I was very crafty about hoarding my resources, figuring, how could I get through the day?
Your brain resources.
That's right.
Because you would, if you used up your brain resources, you'd be totally useless
Well,
later.
That's another tricky thing about concussion. As long as I didn't think and do anything, I was pretty much normal.
But how can you not think? We think all the time. Well,
especially being a university professor, you have to admit there's a certain irony there that an AI professor who studies the brain, suffers this kind of injury. But it did give me some skills at being crafty. Toward the end, I had that, you had mentioned this interesting test I would give myself in the morning, and that was to name my children. And on the good days, it would take me 6 seconds in the usual way. And I knew I could take on some challenges, maybe prepare for classes, get some grading done. And on the bad days, it would take me over 3 minutes. And even at the end, I couldn't be sure that I had successfully named all 5. And on those days, I knew top priority, be a father. Second priority, do the work of teaching at the university and nothing else.
So why did you have trouble walking sometimes, and sometimes you didn't? You talked about how sometimes you couldn't get out of a chair, sometimes you would stop and not be able to walk, even though your muscles were fine.
Well, let me back up for just a minute, because there's something important that will help us to understand why that would occur. And that is that we don't realize, but we are primarily visual spatial beings. It's what makes us human. It's what makes us sentient as human beings. That some researchers will claim 50 to 80% of our brain gets involved in visual spatial processing at some point. So what would happen to me? There are 2 things you refer to. The initiation problem would occur when I couldn't see the goal. And this is interesting, you can sit here and tell your body, Mimi, get up and walk across the room. It's not listening. And you could even say, I want to be across the room, your desires as a human being. It's not listening to that either. What the body needs is these visual spatial goals, and it will then reach them for you on your behalf, like magic. You say, well, I desire to be on the other side of the room. Without us normally thinking about it, we create that image of being there, and the body responds. The second thing you refer to about the balance, that our visual system and our balance systems are intricately intertwined. And I can give you an example. If you look at your eyes in the mirror, you can move your body all over, and your eyes will stay absolutely fixed on your eyes in the mirror. Because your balance system, all this proprioceptive information goes through your brainstem and makes those micro adjustments in your eyes as your body moves to keep them absolutely pinpoint focused. In addition, you can follow what we call pursuits. So there might be a baseball flying across your front yard. You can follow the baseball and move your body and change the muscles in your spine and still keep it absolutely fixed because of those micro adjustments.
But all that got damaged for you.
Right. So we know, right, the balance system controls the eyes. On the other hand, the eyes also are one of the main ways that we stay upright. And you can see this if you stand on one foot and then close your eyes, you're going to start to wobble. So what would happen to me is, because of this inner ear damage, my balance systems was having trouble, and my eyes would have to take over that functioning to keep me upright. But then as soon as I started to think, if I started to prepare for a class or balance my checkbook, then I needed those visual spatial resources in my brain to solve those symbolic problems. And I could no longer use them for balance, and I would start to fall over. So within 5 or 10 minutes of thinking, I'm holding onto the wall, I can't stay upright.
And people thought you were drunk.
Well, this is, another aspect there. The social aspects of having a concussion is that people don't get it. And sure, when I'm coming back to class, there was this network lab down the hall. I hated this part. It's 9 o'clock and I'm coming back trying to put my key in the door lock, and these students are sitting down in the lab looking down the hall at DePaul University there. And I know they're thinking, what is that drunk guy doing trying to get into his office?
On a serious note, though, Clark, you do say this, that you felt like you weren't human anymore. And you say this quote, "The net result is that we are no longer part of the human race. We look the same, we talk the same, but inside, without really comprehending why, we are hugely changed. The person we have always known is strangely missing."
Yes. Mimi, this is what in my experience, this is one of the most common aspects of having concussion, and it is one of the most troubling. It's like, welcome to the club, welcome to the alien race, welcome to being non-human, as you said here. Inside, outside we look pretty much the same, and if we're not taxing our brains, we can even interact in a pretty normal way. But inside, in so many hundreds of small ways, we have just been completely changed. And there is no machinery left to support being fully human. I can't tell you how many days that I thought, I would love just to have a bad day as a human again, to come home and experience that. And so many concussives I have run into over the years report exactly the same feeling.
And tragically, the suicide rate is so much higher for people that have had concussions.
Well, that is true. We know that. And, it's kind of hard to say exactly why. For example, have concussion that can lead to problems with, people trying to medicate themselves. It can be drug problems. Concussion can lead to emotional difficulties and family problems and, employment difficulties. And each of those, of course, in turn could lead to, suicidal thoughts. But I think, the part here that you raise and is interesting is that when you're already gone inside, I have to ask the question, is it such a big leap to you're not here anyway. To actually, killing yourself, the body's gone away, it's like you're not inside anyway. And so I wonder, I didn't experience any kind of suicidal thoughts myself, but I wonder when I hear this, that someone has killed themselves.
You did say that you would have rather lost 2 legs and 1 arm than have a concussion. Were you just depressed?
No. Boy, I toyed, do I want to put this in the book? I thought, I don't want to whine about this. It's not like I had cancer, but in fact, it was true. Because, losing a couple of legs and an arm, I could still get by, and I'd be human. I would actually be there, even though my body was partly missing, but the me that I care so much about would be present. And I thought, I know there are other people out there, 6 million other people like me going through that, and 5,000 people a day between right now and this time tomorrow. 5,000 more people will suffer brain injuries, and some of them may start going through this as well. I thought I need to put that in the book.
You were sometimes in a lot of physical pain. Where does that come from?
Well, yes, if I knew I was going to, try to sort out the math for my taxes or balance my checkbook, then I would head out to 7-Eleven and come back with a large bag of ice because I knew what was coming.
A headache.
The problem is that all of these micro adjustments in your eyes, from the spine to your eyes and the orientation of your head, there's so many retinal signals going in both directions to adjust your eyes and using your eyes to adjust the body. My understanding is those muscles can just get all tied up in knots, and the result is that I can absolutely comment on is this intense head pain and neck pain. And the way I would get away from that is lie down in that bathtub full of ice cubes and cold water. And it's not convenient. It doesn't get easier, but it was better than the pain. And I am so sorry for the people that are still going through that now.
And the nausea as well from the balance problems.
That's right. And I think, with so many balance problems that would crop up anytime I started to think, pretty much. Nausea was usually the limiting factor in how far I could push myself. Yeah.
So let's talk about the good news now.
Good.
We've done all the bad things. By chance, 8 years after your accident, you meet a doctor named Donnelly Marcus.
Yes.
What does she tell you?
Well, I'd been to see so many. I tried, over the years, and this was a last gasp effort. I searched on the term brain plasticity, and I hired a professional organizer, Heather, and we sent out letters to about 30 different places that we thought might, deal with the modern principles of brain plasticity after this fabulous book by Norman Deutsch called The Brain That Changes Itself. But it was purely by luck that Heather was talking about this at a party a few days later, and she ran into a woman at that party that was raving about how effective Donnelly Marcus was in treating her brain injury. So I called her up, and that began the miracle that gave me back my life.
And she did a bunch of tests on you, and then she said, "We can fix this. I know what's wrong with you, and we can do this."
Indeed she did. The thing is, over all those 8 years of seeing all these people, no one ever called back because, it's like, there's nothing we can do. Could you go away? And Donnelly was different. In fact, we were joking around. I'd gone out to the movies just for an hour or two after seeing her because I was so saddened, by yet again going to see someone. And, there's this strange moment when she saw how contorted I was, just trying to make this simple line drawing that her assistant was saying, hand signals, should I call 911? Do we need to call an ambulance? It was, kind of funny. They didn't, fortunately. But I thought, yet again, I'm going to go home. I'll never hear from her again. But she called back, said, "Clark, I'm on this. I've got a plan. I want to get you in here in the next couple of days. We can fix this." And she was right.
And what did she start doing?
She did immediately at that time say, "I also want you to see my brilliant colleague, the optometrist, Deborah Zielinski. So we're going to work together on this." And then with Donnelly, she started giving me brain puzzles. And I would start out just literally paper and pencil. And I'm drawing these triangles, 3 dots, reconstruct a triangle, and squares, construct the square, then put the triangle on top of the square. And then we might start getting like these bass drum figures, and then a little 3D work. And day after day, just pages and pages of these brain puzzles as she started with basic cognition.
What were those puzzles doing to your brain?
The magic of the science behind both what Donnelly did and what Deborah Zielinski did was that working with neuroplasticity, they needed to find parts of my brain that were healthy. And the brain is largely plastic in these parts where we have this higher order reasoning. And Deborah Zielinski used the prescription eyeglasses to redirect light to activate these healthy areas of my brain. And Donnelly at the same time was giving me these brain puzzles to give those parts of my brain exercise as they learned the new skill to take over from the parts that could no longer support being human in that way.
Let's talk about the optometry, because this is really fascinating. Like, I can get that puzzles can train your brain to do different things, but putting on glasses changes your brain somehow? How does that work?
Well, this does sound a little, you're going to think, let's get the tarot cards or what. I'm not to offend, but they were prescription eyeglasses. I'm wearing them now. You could go to Lens Crafters and order them. They are prescription eyeglasses, and the paper and pencil puzzles are just like in the book, pieces of paper with brain puzzles that I would solve. And you think, how could that possibly reconfigure something as complex as the human brain when all these brilliant doctors along the way were stumped? But the key is, as I said, we are primarily visual spatial beings, and we don't realize it, but these retinas, this retinal pathway into our brain it has a profound effect on how we can configure our brains. That many kind of the modern neuroscience way of looking at retinal processing is that this is part of our brains hanging out the front of our heads. We're talking about millions of inputs through the brain. And so they would use these techniques of the prescription eyeglasses and the brain puzzles cells to activate different parts of my brain, and it just was incidental, the fact that they're using these retinal inputs to make those changes.
And you started seeing changes right away.
I think my case may have been a little bit unusual, but after 8 years, and this was at a point, Mimi, where I was going to lose my house, I was going to lose my job, I was in a few weeks of losing custodianship of my children and becoming a ward of the state. I just couldn't keep it up anymore. And yet within 3 weeks of my first going to see Donna Lee for the first time, well, actually within 3 weeks of getting my brain glasses a week later, I would say I was about 70% recovered. It was just
recovered.
Yes, and then of course within a year, maybe 2 years, I continued with the puzzles for 6 months and the eyeglasses for another 2 years, fully recovered. All of my symptoms were gone. So when we talk about the magic capabilities, reconfiguring capabilities of the plastic brain, Norman Doidge is absolutely correct that it's phenomenal in its recuperative abilities if we could just find the way sometimes to bootstrap it in the right direction.
But these glasses worked when your eyes were closed. This is what I find incredible.
Well, now we need just a moment of science here. Okay. But it's easy science. You go to the eye doctor and you think, okay, can you see the letter E? You know, fine. Now we are treating that just little dime-sized area of our visual space, right in the center of our vision. That's just, the central vision. All around that is the critically important peripheral processing that gives meaning to that center vision. You can imagine, putting these cardboard tubes from the middle of a paper towel roll over your eye and trying to get through the day. Nothing would make any sense. So a typical optometrist is never going to treat any of this huge space that gives meaning to that center vision. And now the part you're talking about is this collection of pathways which process light, but they are non-image forming. The retinal input goes directly to our endocrine system and our hormones and affects our posture and our emotions, our sleep cycles. So yes, even I found that in the early days, eyes closed, I'm sleeping. When I wore the glasses, I wouldn't go backwards. I would continue to improve because with our eyelids closed, these non-image forming retinal pathways still have enough light to operate. They need very little light, and yet they have a profound effect on placing us in the space and the world around us. I wore them 24 hours a day for those first few weeks. Even a couple months I wore them at night as well.
What's the ghost?
Well, you had talked about early on this sense of alienation, that I was gone. I mean, I felt that profoundly, and I think a lot of people with these troubling brain injuries feel that same thing. And during this first 3-week period when I was starting my recovery, I felt my body just awakening again to find its place in the world. Maybe I was dancing down the hallways because I couldn't walk anymore, but my body was rediscovering how to move, and this new brain real estate was, fantastically taking over these new tasks which it had never seen before. It was like a 6-month-old baby learning the world, and then my place within my body, within the world. But something spooky was also happening at that same time, and that was that I had a sense that someone was following me around about 30 feet behind my right shoulder. And I was a little worried because I had not experienced any kind of delusional thinking, and I thought maybe I'm finally going over the edge here. But this sort of ghost, so to speak, that was following me around, I grew comfortable with it, and after 2 weeks it got about 20 feet away, and after 3 weeks it was maybe 10 feet away, and 3.5 weeks it was finally just a couple of feet away. And then in this fabulous moment outside my office one night after teaching a graduate class, I was about to put the key in the door, and I kind of looked up and I realized, oh, that's me. That's the boy that used to ride his bicycle up at 11 years old to study math and physics at UC Berkeley, and built boats and sailed around San Francisco Bay, and the guy that loved music so passionately all his life, that guy was coming home. And I went into the office, you'll forgive me, but even now, just remembering that, I have tears streaming down my face, and the next day I moved inside and I had come back.
These things that you use, the puzzles, the glasses, can they help anybody that's had a brain injury?
Well, Mimi, we can't know that. I mean, there were 3 reasons I wrote the book. And one of them absolutely was, to put out to a general audience. I think this may be the first time a book like this presents these techniques to, in a way, for a typical, just a guy on the street that's gone through this to make sense of the treatment. And so, of course, I hope that some subset of those people with brain injuries would benefit in the way I did. And, we can't know. Every injury is different. But I am getting email already from around the world, and what I hear is, thank you for telling my story. And it might be one part of the book or another part of the book, but there are so many people that seem to be going through my same experience. And thus we would have to wonder, could you then also benefit from the same treatment? And what's the downside? I mean, we're talking about going in for 2 hours worth of these very scientifically based neurooptometric tests. I mean, why wouldn't you take your children in for a full eye exam in this way to see, are these non-image forming pathways working correctly? And, if we find a midline shift, well, that's going to explain some of what's happening. Or with a yoked prism walk, maybe if you're leaning to one side when you're wearing these yoked prism glasses, well, that gives us information. So we don't know. I mean, we can hope.
So what do you recommend to people that have suffered a concussion? What should they do?
Well, the first thing is, I'm not an MD. I'm pretty much just a guy who took notes, and I happen to have a PhD in AI. But, you have to say, the first thing, go see your doctor or go to the emergency room, because they might save your life. I mean, these are brilliant people who've been through medical school, and maybe they say, gee, you've got a blood clot. If you hadn't come in an hour, you'd be dead. Having said that, if it's serious, you might want to ask your doctor about, brain cooling techniques. I think I'll just mention that because my own impression, and certainly some of what I read about this, is that there's secondary damage that's going to take place from the brain swelling that might be occurring. And I think these brain cooling techniques may help avoid some of that secondary damage. Then take it seriously. I mean, this can have a profound effect on your life. And as we said, there's 6 million people in the United States alone who've discovered that. So don't go out there and plan these physical activities. Just put your head down on your shoulders in an easy way and take it easy for a week or two and see how it goes. And then also, don't tax yourself mentally. Don't come home and try to do your math homework, because that kind of brain activity can create problems, I think, as well. Just pamper yourself for a while. And then having said that, if you are suspicious that this is, going to be ongoing, go see one of these people, and they are maybe few and far between, but that are expert in these neurooptometric developmental rehabilitation techniques. Because, as we said, what's the downside? And these tests can be so extremely revealing. Why not get that information?
The book is The Ghost in My Brain. Clark Elliott, thank you so much for being on the program.
Thank you so much, Mimi.
This has been the Mimi Geerges Show. Thanks for watching, and I hope you'll tune in again next time.